By late 1944, Japan was collapsing after a decade of war. Its economy was shattered, its army scattered across half of Asia, and the islands it once conquered were falling one by one to American forces. In this dark moment, Second Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda was sent to a small island called Lubang in the Philippines. His orders were clear: fight to the end. Never surrender. Never believe the war is over unless told directly. Only 2 months later, American forces arrived and took the island with ease. Most Japanese soldiers were either killed or surrendered. But Onoda and 3 of his men fled into the jungle and began a guerrilla war against both the Americans and local villagers. They ambushed convoys, burned crops, and hid among the trees, waiting for the enemy. In August 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan officially surrendered, and World War II was over. But deep in the jungles of Lubang, Onoda heard nothing of this. He believed the news was fake, enemy propaganda, and that Japan would soon return to fight again. Thus began his own private war, one that would last 30 more years. American forces dropped thousands of leaflets across the jungle. "The war is over. Come home." Onoda read them and burned them. "It's an American trick," he told his men. And the fighting continued. 5 years passed. He still raided villages, stole food, and burned fields. Even letters dropped from their families were dismissed as fakes. To him, everything was part of a conspiracy. By the 1950s, few of Onoda's men remained. One surrendered, another was killed, and the last died in 1972. In a shootout with police while burning rice fields. That was 25 years after the war had ended. Now Onoda was completely alone, surviving on insects, drinking from streams, and believing he was still serving his sacred duty. When news broke in 1972 about the death of his last companion, Japan was stunned. Could Onoda still be alive? His story flooded the media. Some called him a hero. Others said he was insane, lost in time. He became an urban legend, the soldier who refused to stop fighting. That same year, a young adventurer named Norio Suzuki appeared. A restless student who hated conformity, he had dropped out of university and began traveling across Asia and Africa. He joked to friends, "I'm going to look for 3 things: Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman." He went to Lubang Island unarmed and without a plan, shouting into the forest, "Onoda, the emperor is worried about you." And in just 4 days, he actually found him. At first, Onoda couldn't believe it, but he was relieved to see a fellow Japanese after 30 years. They talked for hours. Onoda said, "I was ordered never to surrender, so I stayed." Suzuki smiled and replied, "And I came here to find you, and a panda, and the snowman." 2 men, each chasing an impossible dream, had finally met by fate. Suzuki returned to Japan and told the government that Onoda was still alive. Weeks later, Onoda's former commanding officer traveled to the island himself. When Onoda saw him, he saluted sharply. His commander said, "You've completed your mission, soldier. The war is over. Tears filled Onoda's eyes as he removed his rifle, for the first time in 30 years. The longest one-man war in history had finally ended. When Onoda returned to Japan in 1974, he was welcomed as a national hero. But he didn't recognize his homeland. Japan had become industrial, materialistic, filled with televisions, ads, and Western fashion. Later he said, "In the jungle, I suffered, but life had meaning. Here, everything feels meaningless." His shock was deeper than any wound he'd ever suffered. After years of temporary fame, Onoda decided to leave. Unable to adapt to modern Japan, he moved to Brazil in 1980. There, he lived a quiet life until his death. In his final interviews, he said, "I have no regrets. I believed in what I was doing. Pain was my path to honor." In the end, Mark Manson wrote about Onoda to reveal a deeper truth. A person can live an entire life in service of an illusion. Courage isn't about never giving up. It's about knowing when to stop. Onoda chose to suffer for loyalty. Suzuki chose to suffer for adventure. Both lived in their own way. And both remind us that meaningless suffering is the truest defeat.